Okay, I've been given the word, everything's ready to go, so let's get started. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to the 7th annual induction ceremony for the Wareham High School Athletic Hall of Fame. A little history of this is that, a little background is that the Hall of Fame actually started in 1989, and there was a single induction back in those days. A group of people were inducted, and it was a very nice event. It took place over in Fairhaven. And then, for whatever reason, the Hall of Fame went inactive for 24 years. And it wasn't until 2013 that a few folks got together, Richie Coyle and some of the members in the committee, got together with the high school principal, the current high school principal, Mr. Scott Palladino, and they became the driving force to reinvigorate the Hall of Fame and get it going again. And since 2013, it's been very successful. We began the initial Hall of Fame inductions were held at Salerno's function room in Onset, but that venue became too small as the Hall of Fame became very popular, the ceremony, as it is tonight, with a great crowd here. So it was moved here to the Rosebrook Convention Center here a few years ago, and we've been here since. So, and in speaking of that, I'd like to thank the staff here for the wonderful meal we just had. I thought it was very well done, and we want to thank them for the service. Scott usually is here, Scott Palladino, but his son is participating in a youth hockey tournament in Toronto, Canada this weekend, and he's not available to be here. And he said to me, I spoke to him on the phone, and he said, "Oh, yeah, I hope you have some great jokes to tell." And I said, "Well, not really, but I said, if I do, I can use the same ones like every year because it's always a different crowd. So you wouldn't hear them, so it wouldn't make any difference. So if I did have some jokes, it'd probably be really old. And some of you that have been here before might have heard them. With that, I'd like to acknowledge, first of all, we have several members, inductees of the Hall of Fame here among us. And if you don't have to stand up and take a bow, but if you just stick your hand up and we can acknowledge you. I see Jim Brajoli and Eddie Montero. I see Spider out there. So if anybody here that's been inducted to the Hall of Fame, if you could just put your hand up and we can give you a little acknowledgement. Oh, Della there too, yeah. Member of the team. I didn't see your back was to me. Eddie, all right. Unfortunately, this past a month or so ago, we lost one of our more recent inductees. And I'd just like to, make mention with sad news that we heard that Ronnie Oliver passed away. He was an inductee back, I think, in whatever year it was, 2 years ago. So 2015, Ronnie was inducted, and he unfortunately passed away last month. So if we could just think of Ronnie for a minute, that would be good. And this year we have a really outstanding group of people being inducted, as we do every year, but we're very glad that they're all but one are able to attend. We have Mr. Brian Atwood, Tommy Sudo, Scott Vasconcelos, Peter Sylvia III, Shane King, Teresa Gomes, and we have Madeline Sylvia being inducted as a coach, and we also have the 1948 football team being honored. So that would be that's what we have ahead of us, which I'm sure we're all excited to hear. And quite often at these ceremonies, at the very end, when everybody's getting ready to leave and you're putting your coats on, then the person who is up here, you say, well, we want to thank this person and thank that person, and everybody's anxious to get going. So I'd like to do this first, and that's to thank the committee that puts this on every year, to do it now before we get started, and acknowledge their hard work. Like I said, Scott Palladino, along with some of the original members of the committee, really got this thing going. And the members of the committee, I know they're not all here, but if you would, again, you can put your hand up. Steve Baptiste Sr., I don't think I've seen him here. Jim Brajoli, Richie Coyle, Mary Jane Driscoll, John Gonzalez, Eddie Montero, Scott Palladino, who's absent as well, Jack Stinson, who's not here, and Judy and Arthur Sandlin. If you'd give all these folks a nice round of applause, because without their hard work, we wouldn't be here this evening. Okay, our first inductee is Mr. Brian Atwood. I just had the opportunity to meet Mr. Atwood before the ceremony, as reading through his resume and biography. We found that he had quite an outstanding career as a high school athlete at Wareham High School, and then went on to many great accomplishments afterwards. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce his nephew, Mr. David Atwood, who is going to present Brian to us for the induction. So, Mr. David Atwood.
Good evening, everybody. My name is David Atwood, and I'm Brian Atwood's nephew. Brian is part of the class of 1960 and is being inducted tonight for basketball and football, where he captained both teams his senior year and earned all-state honors. Unfortunately, I did not have the opportunity to see my uncle play football nor basketball. It was before my time. And I'm sure my uncle dominated the basketball court, but my perspective tonight is mainly a football one, as I played at Northeastern University, right down the street from where my uncle played at Boston University. We definitely share the same passion for football, that I know. My uncle earned a full scholarship to Boston University and played tight end and defensive end. The schedule at the time, 1962-1963, was impressive and stacked with strong football programs. I did a little Google search, and just to verify, and BU's schedule included Kansas, Jayhawks, Boston College, and West Point, to name a few. It's the Kansas game in September 1962 that my uncle mentioned to me on a number of occasions throughout my career. He said, "I tackled Gale Sayers." Every time I heard this from my uncle, I responded unenthusiastically, "Wow, that's great." I knew of Gale Sayers, but truly didn't appreciate his greatness, especially when I was younger. Those that don't know, Gale Sayers is one of the most elusive running backs in the history of the NFL and was inducted to the NFL Hall of Fame in 1977. In preparation for tonight, I desperately scanned Google, old statistics, and tried to find proof of that tackle. There's a lot of information out there, but there wasn't proof. Not that I don't believe you, Uncle Brian, but tackles come in lots of forms. Was it one that he tripped over your face mask after being juked out of your shoes? Or perhaps on the extreme other end, were you one of the few that didn't fall for his jaw-dropping fakes and slammed him down to the ground like Dick Butkus did? Which one was it? I noticed you never described the tackle. But I know why. It doesn't matter. You tackled Gale Sayers, and that's all we need to know. I have great respect for you, Uncle Brian, and your generation of football players. They played both ways, which is unheard of in today's football. They played extremely tough and with great athleticism. Even though the game of football is changing and evolving, the spirit of the game remains, and it is by far the best team sport. After my uncle finished his college career, he received NFL invitations to the Dallas Cowboys and the Buffalo Bills training camps, but chose to start his career in government instead. I think he made the right decision, not because he wouldn't have made it, because he probably would have, but because his influence in government and foreign affairs was much more impactful and important. Thank you.
That's a long walk to get up here for someone my age, but thank you very much, David. I think you all should know that David was a great football player as well. He was all New England, the captain of the Northeastern team, And I watched him play many, many games around the East Coast. He had an instinct for the ball. And since he's my nephew, I didn't even have to pay him to exaggerate about me tonight. The truth is that there were 7 other guys involved in that same tackle. It was the only way we could get Gale Sayers. Anyway, I have a few people that I need to thank tonight for this great honor. And first, the selection committee. Most of you are sitting here. Some of you are even old enough to remember me in a Wareham uniform. I also want to thank Tiny Lopes, who nominated me for this. And he's a very dear friend. And he was a great quarterback and center on our team when I was a junior. He was a senior. And he was a great athlete and a wonderful human being. And he just called me the other day in anticipation of this event tonight. And I know he wanted to be here, but he prefers the sunshine in California. So I asked him to stay away from the fires. My football coaches deserve a great deal of credit for driving me to do as well as I could. Clem Splain is a legend in Wareham and was recently named the best coach in Massachusetts over the past 50 years by the New Bedford Standard Times. And we players both feared and loved Papa Splain, and that's what we called him behind his back. He got the very best out of us, and losing wasn't an option, as many of you in this room know. In my senior year, Frank Almeida came to Wareham, and he transferred his passion for the game to his players. Coach Almeida has coached just about every team in this area, and he's still going strong in his 90s. He also helped me to win a full scholarship to Boston University, then a Division I program, and if it hadn't been for him, I would never have met Gale Sayers. I want to dedicate this award to my late cousin, Barry Atwood, who played at Wareham a few years before me. Barry was a commander in the Navy, served 3 tours in Vietnam, where he was wounded. Then Agent Orange got him, and he died of cancer at the age of 35. Barry was like an older brother to me, and he taught me what toughness was all about. His sister Joanne is here today, and there's no bigger sports fan in the world. She's sitting back there. Her husband, Elmer St. Germain, was a teammate of Barry's, and he was a tough football player himself. My brother Bruce is here. He played basketball and baseball for Wareham, and his wife Donna was a cheerleader for Wareham High School. My son John, who was a leader on a Class A football team in Maryland and played college football. My daughter Debbie came up from Maryland, and she played in a state championship in field hockey. My daughter Michelle, who's now at Wellesley, played soccer for a division champion in Minnesota and played field hockey as well. And my wife Susan played basketball. She called it netball at the time. She loves tennis. She plays golf well enough, sometimes even to beat me if I give her enough strokes. So we like sports in our family. I just want to say I've got some wonderful memories of Wareham. There were 3 great hangouts on Main Street: Jay's Drugstore, Deacus's, and Waters. We had Saturday night dances at the Monday Club. I know that sounds a little strange, Saturday at the Monday Club. We had great teachers at Wareham High, and we were very fortunate there because in those days women couldn't get the best professional jobs, so they became teachers. So we had great women teachers, and there are people like Mrs. Pettizani, Miss Rose, Miss Tompkins, Mrs. Weber, Madame Bordeaux taught me French. That's why I speak it so well. My daughter is laughing at me now. Science teachers like Mr. Dubiel, who helped us all score higher on the SATs. Wareham schools gave me a good beginning. I've had a pretty successful career, but Wareham kept me grounded. It was important in Washington to remember that you weren't as all-powerful as you thought you were, and when you run a government agency, your subordinates laugh at all your jokes, even the ones that aren't so funny. Washington, D.C. is a pretty tough place, and there's a lot of competition for the best jobs. And when you get there, you're faced with having to make some really difficult decisions. And more than once, I could hear Coach Splain whispering in my ear, when the going gets tough, it's time for the tough to get going. He and my parents taught me to tell the truth and to maintain my integrity, and I think I managed that over quite a few years in Washington, a pretty tough, competitive town. Growing up in Wareham, I was also very comfortable with diversity. There's a richness of life in this town, that is the product of immigrants and second-generation Americans. My friends, neighbors, and teammates were from parents who came from all over the world, from places like Ireland, Italy, Greece, Poland, France, Finland, and a small group of islands off Africa called Cape Verde. I had a particular affinity for the Cape Verdean kids. Some of them happened to be the smartest in my class. They were great teammates, making our team stronger, not just because they were good athletes. Some were and some weren't. They made us strong because they brought to the locker room a spirit that reflected appreciation for the opportunity that they had been given. I learned something from that early experience that made the challenges I faced in D.C. seem surmountable. President John Kennedy once called Washington a city with northern charm and southern efficiency. It was also a place where racism lived, as it does today in too many places in this country. My exposure to the explicit racism in the South made me think about the implicit variety we experienced in Wareham in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Except in school, our town was pretty much segregated. We lived in white and black parts of town, and we went to separate dances. I'll never forget the day when my classes valedictorian and salutatorian, Nancy Andrade and Beverly Gomes, both Cape Verdeans, asked me what I would do if they came to the Monday Club dance. I was surprised. I said nervously, "I would dance with you." I had never given it much thought, but I should have. We talked at length after that, and they taught me a lot about life in Wareham. Thank God Wareham gave me those experiences. The surge of anger when Coach Splain would tell us he overheard the other team calling some of our teammates racist names. The pride one felt when we embraced one another after a victory, of which there were many. The camaraderie we felt when we sang our fight song. Thanks to Wareham, I would always be able to see the common humanity in people, whatever their race, religion, or sexual preference. In all the time I've spent living away from Wareham, I've never forgotten how special my school years here were. So I want to end by asking you to join me in a song that has lived through the years. Now you got to follow me. This song was usually led by one of our Cape Verdean teammates, but I'm going to try to step into their shoes tonight. So please repeat after me. Down by the river, we took a little walk, and we met old Bourne, and we had a little talk. Aye, 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 aye. What you think you're putting down? We're gonna beat your team and run 'em out of town. One more stanza. Now Bourne had a rooster, and they put him on a fence. The rooster crowed for Wareham, showed he had a lot of sense. Thank you, Wareham. That doesn't even look like me.
It sure does. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to present Brian with the plaque and a watch to go with it. So,
Thank you very much.
and thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Our next inductee is, sorry. Thank you very much. That was outstanding. Our next inductee is unfortunately not here this evening, Tommy Sudo. And before we move on beyond, I'd like to say a few words on behalf of Tommy. Tommy, as most of us know, was an outstanding football and track athlete here at Wareham High School in the early 70s. My history with Tommy is kind of very personal for me because he was among the very, very first students that I ever taught in 1972 when I got my job in Wareham. And I had the opportunity to have Tommy in class a number of times in different courses I taught back in those days. Tommy was a very interesting guy, and or is a very interesting. I don't want to sound as if he's not with us anymore. He's just not here. He was a fantastic athlete, and I'm sure that the coaches that are here, Phil LeFevre and Craig Sherman, can speak to his prowess on the field, on the football field. In 1973, Tommy led the entire state of Massachusetts in scoring in high school football. He had world-class speed as a track athlete in both the 100-yard dash, and he was an outstanding triple jumper as well. I just had an opportunity to spend a little time speaking to one of his coach when he was here. Jim Lanigan was here earlier. He had to leave, but we were discussing Tommy and his athletic ability. And one of the things I mentioned is that I personally, as a fan, had never seen any high school athlete that had the ability to accelerate, to cut, and then to re-accelerate with the speed that Tommy had and the lightning speed he possessed in terms of his ability to cut and get going again. And Jim Lanigan pointed out that not only was he a lightning quick athlete and a tremendous running back, among the best that's ever played here at Wareham High School, but he was also extremely tough. He said a lot of times over the years coaching very fast running backs that a lot of times they didn't exhibit quite the amount of toughness that Tommy did. He was willing to take it and he was willing to give it out when he had the ball in his hand. So I was very disappointed when I heard that he wasn't going to be here because I looked very much forward to seeing Tom. I've seen him a few times over the years, and it's always been a very pleasant reunion whenever I had a chance to run into him. So on behalf of the committee, the selection committee, and the school committee, and the school itself, I would like to formally induct Tommy Sudo into the Wareham High School Athletic Hall of Fame. Our next inductee is Mr. Scott Vasconcelos. And to present Scott, and again, from this point on, it's really exciting to me because all of the inductees from this point on, with the exception of Mr. Atwood, I've had the opportunity to have in class or have contact with during my career as a teacher and a coach in Wareham. So it's always a real, except I do have to make an exception, not the football team in 1948, but everybody else, since I wasn't born yet. But our next inductee, as I said, is Scott Vasconcelos, and to present Scott is his lovely daughter, Jasmine. So Jasmine, if you'd come up here and present Dad.
I'm really short, so I'm going to have to lower this. So I didn't write a long speech or anything. Scott's my father, and although we're here for him being inducted, I I really think his greatest accomplishment has been being my daughter's grandfather and him being my father. Throughout the years, no matter how much trouble I brought to his front door in school or whatever, not that I was in trouble a lot, he was never the dad to just be like, oh, you're my kid, you did nothing wrong. He taught me a lot of great life lessons, and if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be the mom I am today to my own daughter, and I wouldn't pass on the same values. And just so you guys all know, because you guys wanted to nominate him, I'm now going to live the rest of my life, so long as he lives, hearing about how great he was, and him pulling out clips every so often as he chooses. So, with no further ado, my father.
If ever in my life I wish alphabetical order was here, Mr. Atwood. Thank you. I bring this shirt with me because this was my hero, my brother Joey. He made me want to be a Wareham Viking. I remember a day when my dad came to me and said, I got a phone call. Coach at Stang High School wanted me to go play at Stang. And I said, hell no, Dad. I'm a Viking. I'm going to wear the horns. I'm going to wear them proudly. I didn't put them on the helmet because I put them on crooked all the time. So I had somebody do that for me. And I want to point out two people that really helped me raise my daughter. And these two people would be Coach Bajoli and Coach LaFavor. You guys taught me that I had to be accountable for my actions. I wasn't always accountable for my actions when I was in high school. But you two gentlemen showed me you got to do these things in life. You got to do them right. And if it's worth doing it, it's got to be right. And I thank you too. And I thank my lovely daughter. And I thank my granddaughter for that. I love you guys. Mom, you got two boys in now. I love you. I thank you guys for being here tonight. I thank you for honoring me. I thank you for the inductee. I really appreciate this. And I didn't think I was going to. I tell you the honest truth, I was like, yeah. But as I sat in that chair over there, I realized that, this is a really, really, really great honor. And I thank you all for being here tonight. Everybody, stay safe.
Our next inductee this evening is Peter Sylvia III. And to present Mr. Sylvia is an old friend of mine and a former colleague, Craig Sherman, who's going to present Peter. I just have to mention this because this is a period of time to reminisce. And Craig and I grew up not too far from each other, and we actually rode the same bus to school for 11 years. He was a year ahead of me, so I've known this gentleman quite a long time, and he hasn't changed all that much. He was kind of no, I don't want to say that. When you were in the second grade, and I was in the first grade, and he was in the second grade, let me just say he hasn't changed. So without further ado, Craig, would you present your inductee, if you would?
Thank you, Peter, I think. I'm not sure. It's an honor and privilege to be here tonight. I was at Wareham for a number of years, and I can honestly say probably some of the best, most enjoyable times of my coaching career were at Wareham. So when I come home here, it's kind of like a homecoming. I was looking forward to seeing Tommy Suter. I got a chance to, I don't know how much I coached him, to be on the same field, and it was a privilege to watch him play and to have any effect I had on him. Earlier, Jim Lanigan was here, who coached Tommy, and I started coaching with Jim. I was hoping he was going to stay, but obviously he had to leave. In talking about my guy, Peter Sylvia, first of all, right off the bat, Peter, I'll tell you, if you and Tommy raced, he might have got you in the 100. You definitely would have got him in the 2. So, also, I have to say the displeasure of coaching against Scotty, because you came into varsity football about the time I moved over to OR, and I think you made a couple of my first years pretty miserable. So, but you are certainly worthy of this great award. It's kind of a pleasure to be on the same field as you. In regards to Peter, let me back up. I was here 2 years ago and got to present very proudly Nicky Fernandez. And Nicky was an outstanding football player, outstanding track athlete, a few years ahead of Peter. Peter has told me he used to look up to Nicky. And they're cut from the same mold. And one of the things that I'd use Coach Lanigan as a backup, he used to use the term blue chipper. And a blue chipper is someone who combines great athletic ability with a great character and great work ethic. So in that respect, Peter and Nicky were the same person, just a couple years apart. Peter was a tremendous football player. When he turned it on, if he found a seam or hit the edge, he was gone. And even better track athlete, which is hard to believe. Peter's junior year, I think he led Division IV, as I recall, with 17 touchdowns. His senior year, a hip injury slowed him down a little bit, but he was able to perform in track. And if I recall, we went through some notes together. In his junior and senior year, he was undefeated in the 100, 200, and long jump. And he won the class meet in both the long jump and 200. In his senior year, he won the state coaches meet, which is an all-class meet, with a phenomenal jump of 22.10, was it? Which is unbelievable. And through all this work, as I said, it was a tremendous talent and a tremendous work ethic. A couple of quick stories about Peter that will show you a little bit of the type of kid he was. His freshman year, he comes out for track, and we had seen him in freshman football and knew he was an up-and-coming athlete. But it's early in the season. It's in March, a real cold, nasty day that we get in March, and we still go out and try and run track. And the kids wanted to try field events this day, so they're starting to put out all the equipment. And Peter was being a dutiful freshman and doing his share, putting out equipment. And we had this old high jump standards. It's a cylinder with a metal rod in it that goes up and down. Well, when Peter put it out, the metal rod inside came slamming down and hit Peter's thumb. And it just didn't hit it. It crushed it. It was real bad. And Peter came back to me. I happened to be in the office for a minute, and he said, Coach, do you think I could get a Band-Aid? And I looked at his thumb, and his tissue oozing out and blood. And I said, Peter, you got to go to the hospital. And he didn't bat an eye, and I don't think that sidelined him for too long at all. But just right away, we knew he was a tough kid, physically and mentally. He was a tough kid. Another story that kind of tells a little bit about Peter's character. We were up his senior year at the state all-class meet, which is everybody in the state, and Peter had won the Class C, I think we were at the time. And he's competing in the long jump, and his first 2 jumps were fouls. Peter had a little problem with fouling at the time. I guess it was poor coaching. I'm sorry, Peter. But his last jump, I happened to be at the time, this was up at BC, and I was in the stands looking down over the long jump pit. And he comes running down, and he hits the board, and he flies through the air. And his jump looked like it was 2 feet better than anyone else's, not even close. It looked like it might have been like a 24-foot long jump, which was in his realm if he hit the board, right? And for the longest time, there was nothing said. And then finally, the official said, foul, and that, that canceled the jump. And now he wasn't even going to get to go into the finals. And I had to come down from up above and walk around and find Peter, and he was, as you would expect, pretty dejected. But to his credit, he came back a short time later in the all-class meet, took 4th in the 200 meter, which is the best from everyone, and broke the school record with, I think, a 21.8, which is a really phenomenal time. So those things show the mettle, the character of Peter, and we certainly know he had the great ability. Peter had a lot of offers for football and track. I think he decided on the track, which was, I think, a wise decision. And he went out to Sacramento City Junior College, which I found out subsequently is a school that does end up sending a lot of people to big-time schools. And he performed very well there. In reminiscing with Peter, I think you had a 24-10, 25-10 long jump, which is amazing, and a 45 1/4, 400, which is starting to get up there with the big boys, and was certainly having a great deal of success. Unfortunately, his mom, Debbie, passed away his sophomore year, and that kind of derailed the rest of his college plans. Peter and I have talked, and who knows, what would have happened from there, where would he have gone? But he came back this way. I think in talking to him, he bounced around a little bit, maybe some construction, but then found his niche in corrections, and had a long, successful career. And now is married to his lovely wife, Anna, has 4 daughters. His daughter, Peyton, is here tonight, and is now out of corrections. I think, Peter, if I recall, you told me you'd like to get into some coaching. That would be a great move to pass along some of your expertise. One of the great perks of coaching that I enjoy all the time is you can not see someone for years. I'm always telling my wife I'm going to go see this kid or that kid. Now some of these kids are turning out to be 50 years old. They're not kids anymore. But when you see them, because you work so hard together, you committed together because you went to war together or whatever, the relationships come back like you never were apart. And when Peter and I met to reminisce and to go over some things, it's like I saw him 2 weeks ago, or like we were together. We haven't been apart for 20 whatever years it is. And I am happy to announce too that in meeting with Peter, he's the same sincere, genuine, warm person with a kind of a goofy grin on his face all the time. That he always was, and I was very thrilled when he called to ask me to present him, and I can think of no one who is more worthy. My congratulations to the rest of the class, but I'm really, really happy to be able to present Peter Sylvia. I'd like you to welcome him now as the newest member of the Wareham Hall of Fame. Thank you.
Making me emotional over here. Well, as I look out here, I see all my family. 4 people here, family members, being inducted. That's a great feeling. My Aunt Madeline, my cousin Tricia, cousin Scotty, we all grew up together. We're all Sylvias. I promised my wife I wasn't going to be emotional, but here we go. Okay. Looking back on my life, gotta come closer. Okay. This way? Okay. Looking back on my life, there was a few people in my life that I really looked up to. Elementary school, there was Darryl Maxwell and Miss Roy, who played a big part. I was a shy kid. I was skinny. I was like this. And Mr. Maxwell and Miss Roy, because of field day, I did so well at field day, they said, hey, Peter, you got to do something else. You got to find your calling. And I think that running is your calling. So what they did is they told me, let's try track clubs and different things. And when I got out of there, 5th grade, I started to run in different junior Olympic track meets. The next person is David Paling. He was my middle school teacher and gym teacher. I don't know if any of you guys know, but back then, and I don't know if it's still there, if you didn't make weight to be on the Tigers football team, you couldn't play. Every one of my family members, even my brother, they got to play. But I was like under 100 pounds, so I wasn't able to play. Hey, I was 5'8", but I was 100 pounds. I couldn't play. But David Paling was one of my gym teachers, and he helped me start lifting weights. He showed me how to gain muscle size and eat peanut butter and banana sandwiches to gain weight. I did that, and eventually I made it to the Tigers. My first year playing for the Tigers, they put me as wide receiver. I don't know, I wasn't my brother Andre. I wasn't a great receiver at all. Jamie played on the team, my cousin Corey. Corey was a good wide receiver, and my cousin Georgie. I couldn't catch the ball for nothing. So, but they decided I was going to be Lynn Swan or somebody like that, which I wasn't. Okay. After that, I asked my cousin Jamie, I says, Jamie, would Uncle Joe let us use his weight room so I can gain some muscle? And Jamie said, I don't know, we can go ask him. So Jamie and I got on the bus and we went to Uncle Joe's, which I thank Uncle Joe. And Uncle Joe showed me how to lift weights when I was about 13 years old. And I started, because of genetics probably, started gaining muscle size. When I got into 8th grade, back then, 8th grade, we had double sessions. 8th and 9th grade, we had double sessions. So we had to go to, you either went to school in the morning or you went to school at night. Dobie Franklin, who was another guy I'd like to thank for his insight, said, Peter, you're not a receiver. You're not a receiver. You can't catch the ball. He says, you're a running back. And ever since then, I became a running back. My freshman year, we went undefeated, and Coach Stevens decided to bring me up and put me on the varsity team for the Thanksgiving Day football game. I was there, but I wasn't there because those guys were men. They all wore beards. They had afros. I might have been at the time 140 pounds, but I was gaining muscle size. I was starting to get there, and I was very, very, very nervous. The following year, I got lucky because one of the guys on our football team, a running back, got hurt. And I got promoted to left running back, playing with Ronnie Roach and Davy Jones. I was a sophomore. I did pretty good, scored 10 touchdowns that year. I thought I did okay. But I'd like to thank Dobie Franklin for his insight. I also like to thank Philip Gomes, who, if you guys know who Philip Gomes is, I lived in Pinewood Apartments. It was a good place, a great place for athletes, because we did everything: baseball, basketball, football, everything. And believe it or not, I love my track, so we had to either walk to school or we had to take the bus. Well, I chose something different. We had marshes between Pinewood Apartments and the high school. I jumped all the marshes. I would jump all the marshes going to school. I had a couple people that wanted to jump the marshes with me, but they fell in. They fell in, but I made it there. The other guy I'd like to thank is Coach Stevens, who he gave me the opportunity to play varsity football. I'd like to thank Mr. Jordan, Mr. LaFavor, who's here. He, as a sophomore, when I played varsity, and we were 9-0, playing Bourne, and they skunked us. But you remember the day when you remember that day, and I stiff-armed Bob Perryman and broke my wrist. And Mr. LaFavor at halftime inside the bus, and it was freezing. It was probably a day like today or yesterday. He taped it up. I went into the game, played the rest of the game. And that's how we did things. That's how we did it. But I'd like to thank Mr. LaFavor, who's here, one of my idols. Tommy Sudo, they talk about, he's one of my idols also. Mr. Franklin, Dobie Franklin, I wish he could have been here. Mr. Harding, and Mr. Craig Sherman. I'd like to also thank my other track coaches, Mr. McGuire and Mr. Sherman, for the time that I had being a track member, and we had some great, great teams. I think we went undefeated 4 years in a row. 4 years in a row. I made the state all-star team and was voted Boston Globe's track athlete of the year, all scholastic for a long jump. I also want to say a special thank you to Coach Sherman. He was my football coach, my track coach, and my taxi. He took me to a lot of track meets. Back then, if you qualified for like these invitational meets, a lot of times we didn't have transportation. So I would get in this truck and we would go to these different track meets all around the state, and we bonded. Also, the state meet he was talking about, it was very upsetting to go to a state track meet and be the actual state champion. They awarded me the state championship, but I didn't win the state track meet. So I won the state because I had the longest jump. So they said I was the Boston Globe All-Scholastic Player of the Year for track and in the long jump. I also like to thank Mr. Sherman for just the person that he is. He would take his Saturday, where he could have spent time with his family, and take me all over to. We went to Ashland. We went to Air Mass, Brown University, different track meets all over the place. But he was a good guy to me, and that's the reason why I had him do my induction. I went off script here, but I had to say it. I want to thank my father for my extraordinary DNA. My stepfather, Joe Spinola, for all the sacrifices he made in sending me everywhere. I also wore the Wareham track jersey when I represented Wareham in 2 Junior Olympics in UCLA and Notre Dame, which I went into those, same thing, foul problem, but I went into them as the nation's top long jumper at 21 feet 10 inches at 15 years old. So finally, I want to thank my mother, Debbie, who passed away of aneurysm my first year in college, which pretty much derailed everything I wanted to do. She was my rock. She was everything that I competed for. I always wanted to go to the Olympics or become a pro football player so I can buy her house. Never happened, but my life is good. It turned out well, and I want to thank all the nomination board and everybody that nominated me, Larry Senna, Cousin Lynn Spinola, and Mary Maglio Labonte. And thank you, Coach Sherman, Coach LaFava, Coach Bajoli, and all the coaches that are here today that I got to compete. Mr. Balzerini, I was honored to be in your presence. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Peter. Our next inductee is Shane King, and he's going to be presented by an old colleague of mine, like Craig Sherman, and and Phil LaFave, who's going to present Shane. We all started the same year. And as I bring Phil up here to introduce Shane, I'll just ask one thing. I promised myself when I came up here, I hadn't tell no lies about you as long as you don't tell the truth about me. With that said, Phil, if you'd please step forward to introduce Shane.
Thank you. It's an interesting class, as I had the pleasure of coaching several of these people. And Sherm, I do agree with you. I think Pseudo would have him in the 100. Peter, you'd get him in the 2. I think it's only because Pseudo used to jog out to track practice smoking a cigarette. So we never really knew how fast he could be. But if there's a Mount Rushmore of sprinters at Wareham High School, it's Tommy, it's Peter, and probably Scott Lee, and that's about it. But serious speed in those people. Scotty, I had the opportunity to coach some great quarterbacks at Wareham High School. There was a great wishbone quarterback that you might know, Joe Vass. I had a great passing quarterback, Mike Mullen, but in my mind, the greatest all-around quarterback was you. You could do it all. Madeline, one of the most professionals. I had to work with the cheerleader advisor, always a true professional, and did a great job with those girls. It was always a pleasure having you guys come up to when we had camp, and we'd feed you, and we made the kids all give the girls roses and stuff. So I really enjoyed that. I'm honored to be called upon to present for induction to this hall Shane King. I had the pleasure of coaching him during his outstanding football career at Wareham High School. I don't want to dwell on his many accomplishments on the field, as you can read his impressive resume, but rather I'd like to comment on how he got here. I am of the belief that at the high school level, a coach is an educator first, and our success should be judged by looking 15 years down the road and seeing if we've turned out good citizens, good husbands, good fathers, and gentlemen. Shane has attained the highest level in all of those areas. Shane wasn't the most gifted athlete I have coached. I'm sure there's always discussion in the King household as to who holds that distinction in that house, Shane or Aaron. And Aaron, who is also very deserving of membership in this hall. This is more about what you do to maximize your God-given ability. If Shane wasn't the most talented athlete I have coached, he certainly was the most coachable. A person's ability to receive coaching and make changes as a result of feedback illustrates their character. Give me a team filled with character kids over a bunch of talented prima donnas any day. Coachability is a trait found in good captains. This was recognized in Shane as he was named captain in 3 sports. Being named captain is one of the highest honors you can receive. Shane was a leader by example. His work ethic was second to none. He utilized his mental ability as well as his physical ability. He was a true student of the game. No one was better prepared, and when you are prepared, the game slows down for you. He was able to grasp an offense that was more suited to college players. He knew all of the receivers' assignments, not just his own. In practice, he was at the front of every drill, trying to get reps to improve his game. He had the ability to block out the noise, which in Wareham can be very loud at times, and maintain his focus. When my son Will was younger, he would hang around practice and games working as a water boy. He has a couple of very vivid memories of those days. One is Tony Hughes puking on his shoes. The other is Shane, and I'm grateful for the influence Shane had on my son. He was one of Shane's biggest fans. I told him he wouldn't go wrong watching him. I was fortunate. Several years later, Coach Sherman called and offered me a job at Old Rochester. I couldn't turn down the opportunity to coach my son. Nothing made me prouder than to see him carry himself the way Shane did. I can think of no one who will represent this hall better than Shane. Please welcome Shane King for induction into the Wareham High School Hall of Fame.
All right, I wasn't supposed to get emotional, but Coach, you can't expect anything less from you. I have a lot of people to thank. A lot of people. Pretty much, I'm just going to thank people. Aaron, I promise I'm not going to get emotional. I'm going to really try hard. I just want to thank Wareham High School, for one, the teachers, the staff. It's not just the coaches, it's the teachers as well. Mr. Balzerini, all the teachers that I've had, were role models. I'm proud that my wife's now a teacher. I went to school to be a teacher. It just wasn't in for me. But because it's a really hard job, and I appreciate the work she puts in every day. The great Jim Valvano once said, the greatest gift you can give another person is to believe in them. So I'm going to thank some of the people that believed in me early on. It's Mr. Andre, Ronnie Frazier Jr., Kevin Brajoli, Mr. Franklin, the late Mr. Carlson, Coach Maxwell, who was talked about today, Coach Foote, my meat squad coach Akins, and the late Mr. Montague. He was really one of my basketball coaches a couple of years in JBA. Really was just, you don't realize it back then, but today he was a role model that you always want to be around. My freshman coaches, Mr. Howlett, he made me work hard. Sometimes you didn't want to work hard. Those days he made you work hard. And obviously, Mr. Oliver, very sad to see what has happened to him. He just was a great man. And I can't forget Mr. B, the red face, yelling, screaming, King, 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 Shane, just yelling. But it wasn't really, he's mad at me. Half the time it was like I didn't shoot the ball and I passed it. Wide open three, and I passed it. Can't forget, Mr. B, you were awesome. Quick story about Mr. B, and I don't think I ever called him coach. He was always personable and Mr. B to me. My freshman year, me and Jay Canute got called up to JVs halfway through, and I go, Mr. B, you realize my foot's broken, right? He goes, yeah. I said, but my foot's broken. And he goes, I want you to come to practice. I want you to come to the games, sit and watch and learn. And the thing about this year I just talked to my son about, actually this summer I talked to him about wait and learn, watch and learn. You don't just practice your craft, you watch the older kids, how they conduct themselves. And I didn't realize until I went through this process that Mr. B actually taught that to me way back. Mr. B, I appreciate everything you did. You believed in me early. I really do appreciate it. And of course, Coach LaFave, I figured he had something up his sleeve that would just make me break down a little bit, and I'm pretty proud of myself, kind of keeping it together. He believed in me when he didn't even know me. Freshman year, I wasn't starting QB. I had Osgood slatters in my knees. I had to stop playing for a couple of weeks. Again, Mr. Oliver, Mr. Howlett, they were so unbelievable. He goes, so I was going to the doctors. I was trying to get a brace so I could play football because I didn't play Tigers for the last 5 years. I went to the doctors, but Mr. Oliver was so honest. He goes, I can't hold your position. I was a starting QB as I left. I said, I totally understand, but I want to play and I can't at this point. So I go and get this brace, and the brace was a piece of plastic with some cushion on it because I couldn't even nail down. I think it was all mental because I don't think it did anything. I came back. I was not the starting QB. I wasn't a starting player at all. I was a backup defensive back. I worked and worked and worked. Couple weeks, I think it was a week or two before the Thanksgiving Day game, the freshmen come up and practice. I'm not the QB, so the QBs are playing catch. I'm in with the wide receivers and running backs. So I'm catching the ball, handing off that little pass and go drill that I actually teach my son with his teams. And I hear Coach LaFave go to Mr. Howlett and say, who's that? Who's that number one? He goes, oh, that's King. He's Matt and Jeff King's brother. He goes, okay. I just heard Mr. Howlett say it. I didn't really hear what Mr. LaFave said. So we go along a couple more times. He calls me over after that. I don't even know if he remembers it.